An undercover CEO walks into his own pizza restaurant and stops dead in his tracks when he overhears two boys talking. Richard Dawson built Dawson's Pizza from the ground up. It was his pride, his legacy, a place where families came together and every pizza told a story. But recently, something fell off. The reviews were stellar. The sales were booming and the staff seemed content. Yet, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he had drifted too far from what made his business special. The heart of Dawson's Pizza was no longer beating the way it used to. So he made a decision. He would go undercover, not as a manager or a chef, but as a regular customer, to hear the truth, to reconnect with the soul of his restaurant, and to find out what had been lost. Richard Dawson had always been a man of vision. Years ago, he opened Dawson's Pizza with a single goal in mind: to create a place where families could come together, enjoy good food, and create lasting memories. He built the restaurant from the ground up, using his passion for food and community to fuel his dreams. At the time, it felt like the perfect dream. A family restaurant at heart, a place where everyone knew your name. As the years passed, Dawson's Pizza grew. The restaurant turned into a chain, and Richard expanded his reach, opening new locations and bringing in investors. The company was thriving. The awards came pouring in, and the press loved him. Everyone seemed to be impressed by his success. However, as the business expanded, Richard started to feel something unfamiliar, an emptiness. Something was missing. The people in his restaurants weren't the same. The energy he used to feel when he first started was no longer there. The connections that once made Dawson's Pizza a home for families now felt distant, almost mechanical. One evening, Richard walked into one of his newest locations. The bustling noise of the dinner rush filled the air, but it felt hollow to him. The restaurant was still packed with families enjoying pizza, but he no longer felt the same connection he had felt all those years ago when it was just him and a small team trying to make something special. He watched as a server delivered pizza to a family with young kids. The kids were laughing, their eyes lighting up at the cheesy slices in front of them. But Richard couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the heart of his business had been lost along the way. As he walked through the restaurant, past the smiling faces of customers who had no idea who he was, he wondered, was this still his dream? Or had he become so wrapped up in success and growth that he lost sight of the very thing that had started it all? That evening, Richard made a decision. He had to know the truth, not just from reports or numbers, but from the people. He needed to reconnect with his customers, his staff, and maybe even himself. He needed to see his restaurant again, but not as the CEO. So he put on a simple hoodie, pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes, and walked into the first Dawson's Pizza store he had ever opened. He was just another customer now, blending into the crowd. No one would recognize him. No one would know he was the owner. No special treatment. Richard took a seat at a corner booth, his eyes scanning the room. He wanted to hear the real stories, the unfiltered conversations, the things that no one told him anymore. It didn't take long before he started to overhear something that stopped him cold. From the booth behind him, two young boys were talking, their voices low, almost as if they were trying to be sneaky. Richard leaned forward slightly, straining to catch their words. "I don't even know if we should be here," the first boy whispered, his voice full of uncertainty. "I think we should," the second boy replied, his tone more assertive. "Mom says this is the place. She said he comes here all the time." Richard's heart skipped a beat. The boy's words lingered in the air, their meaning unclear, but something felt strange. He had a gut feeling that this was more than a casual conversation. The first boy hesitated. "What if we get caught?" he asked. "We won't," the second boy shot back. "We just need to figure out who he is. Mom said he ruined her life. He's the reason we don't have anything anymore." Richard's breath caught in his chest. Mom said he ruined her life. The words echoed in his mind. It felt like a punch to the gut. He tried to stay calm, tried to focus on the menu in front of him, but the words kept repeating in his head. The boy continued. She said if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be living like this. Richard couldn't move. He couldn't speak. It felt like the walls of the restaurant were closing in on him. The boys were talking about him. He didn't know how, but he was certain of it. Somehow, something he had done had destroyed their lives. Was he really the villain in someone else's story? Was he the one who had caused all this pain? The waitress approached his table, breaking his focus. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice sweet, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Water will be fine," Richard replied, his voice barely audible. "Just give me a few minutes to look at the menu." She nodded and walked away, but Richard didn't even glance at the menu. His mind was racing. He tried to focus on the boys again, but their conversation had become harder to hear. What if they were talking about someone else? What if this was all just a misunderstanding? But the longer he listened, the more certain he became. They were talking about him. They were angry with him, and he had no idea why. His hand trembled as he clutched the menu, his mind struggling to put the pieces together. This wasn't just about bad business decisions. This was something deeper, something more personal, something that he had overlooked, and now, it seemed, it was all coming back to haunt him. He had to know the truth. He had to find out who these boys were, what they knew, and why they blamed him for their mother's suffering. It wasn't just about his business anymore. It was about his legacy, and it was about the people he had failed. Richard's heart raced as he stepped out of the booth and walked toward the exit. He felt like a man walking into a storm, but one that he had long avoided. As he approached the door, he looked back at the two boys, who were still watching him with a mix of anger and confusion. It was clear now that they weren't just upset, they were hurt. And the source of their pain was something that had been buried in the past, something Richard had never considered until now. He stepped outside into the rain, the cool evening air doing little to calm the fire that was building inside him. He had to speak to Rachel. He had to hear her side of the story, even if it meant confronting the mistakes he had made all those years ago. The drive to Rachel's apartment was a blur. His mind was spinning with questions, with regret. What had he done? How had he missed this? How had he failed her? When he arrived, the apartment was small and tucked away in a quiet corner of East Portland. The building was old, its paint peeling and the windows streaked with rain. The contrast between this humble apartment and the thriving empire that Dawson's Pizza had become struck Richard like a physical blow. He had built his success on the backs of people like Rachel, but somehow he had left her behind, forgotten her. Richard hesitated before knocking on the door. He wasn't sure what kind of reception he would get, but he knew he had to do this. He had to face the consequences of his actions. He knocked, and after a long moment, the door creaked open. Rachel stood there, her face partially obscured by the dim light from a hallway. Her eyes were tired, worn from years of struggle, but there was something unmistakable in them. A fire, a strength that had never been extinguished. When she saw him, her expression flickered between shock and resentment. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. "I need to talk to you," Richard said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I think I owe you an explanation. I had no idea what I did to you." Rachel crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "So now you realize, after all these years?" Richard nodded slowly, his heart heavy with guilt. "I'm not here to make excuses. I need to understand. I need to hear your side." For a moment, Rachel didn't say anything. She just stared at him as if weighing whether to let him in or not. Finally, she stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. The door clicked shut behind him, and Richard followed her into the modest living room. It was a far cry from the sleek, modern offices and restaurants he was used to. This room was cozy but worn. There were family photos on the walls, and the faint smell of something homemade lingered in the air. It felt like home, but it also felt like everything Rachel had fought for had been stripped away, piece by piece. She motioned for him to sit on the couch, but she remained standing, her arms still crossed. Richard took a seat, but his eyes never left her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the frustration, the years of unspoken hurt that she had carried with her. "You were a rising star in my kitchen," Richard began, his voice low. "I should have seen it. I should have done more. But instead, He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Rachel sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You used me," she said, her tone sharp. "You took everything I gave you, my ideas, my recipes, and you made them yours. You made me think I was part of the family. But when I confronted you, you turned your back on me. You pushed me out. You didn't just fire me, Richard. You made sure no one would ever hire me again. You blacklisted me. You ruined my career." Richard flinched, the weight of her words hitting him harder than he expected. He had never thought about it that way. He had been so focused on building his own empire, on pushing forward, that he hadn't seen how his actions had affected those around him. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "I was selfish. I didn't realize how much I was taking from you, how much I was taking from all of you. You were the one who made Dawson's Pizza what it was. But in my quest for success, I lost sight of what mattered." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "And now what? Do you want to fix it? You think you can just waltz in here and make everything better? You think I want your apology?" Richard looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to make it right. If you'll let me, I want to give you the recognition you deserve. I want to bring you back to Dawson's Pizza. I want to make you co-head chef. I want to fix this. I can't undo the past, but I want to give you the chance to do what you do best." Rachel didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Richard could see the walls she had built around herself, walls made from years of betrayal and pain. Finally, she spoke. "You can't just give me a job and expect everything to go back to normal. It's not that simple." Richard nodded, his heart sinking. "I know it's not, but it's a start. And if you'll let me, I want to work with you. I want to rebuild what I broke." For the first time in years, Rachel's expression softened, just slightly. "You don't understand, Richard. It's not just about the job. It's about trust. It's about respect. And you've broken that. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Richard took a deep breath, his voice steady. "I know, and I'm not asking for that right now. All I'm asking is for the chance to show you that I can do better, that I can be better." Rachel stood in silence for a long moment, her arms still crossed. Richard could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make, and for the first time, he felt truly vulnerable. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Richard nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. "Take your time. I'll be here." He stood up to leave, but before he reached the door, Rachel spoke again. "Richard, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me, and for my boys." Richard paused, looking back at her. "I understand," he said, and for the first time, he truly meant it. Richard stood in the doorway of Rachel's apartment, the rain pouring down around him as he took one last, lingering look at the woman he had wronged so deeply. She hadn't said yes, not yet, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made him believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to make things right. He stepped out into the rain, the cold air biting at his skin. But it wasn't the chill of the weather that made him shiver. It was the weight of the conversation, the weight of the past. He couldn't erase the years that had passed, couldn't undo the damage he had done to Rachel, to her career, and the life she had once dreamed of. But he could try. The drive back to his office was a blur of thoughts. He could still hear Rachel's voice in his head, the pain and bitterness in every word. "You can't just give me a job and expect everything to go back to normal," she had said. "It's not that simple." Richard knew that, but he also knew that he had to start somewhere. He had spent so long building his empire, chasing success and accolades, that he had lost sight of the people who had helped him get there. He had neglected the very foundation that Dawson's Pizza was built on: trust, respect, and people. Now he had to prove, not with grand gestures or promises, but with actions, that he could rebuild that foundation. He couldn't fix everything overnight, but he had to try. When Richard arrived at his office, he didn't go to his usual chair behind the polished desk. Instead, he walked to the other side of the room, where a small stack of papers sat untouched. Among them was a proposal he had written months ago, one he had forgotten about in the rush of expansion and business deals. It was a proposal for a new mentorship program, one that would give young chefs and kitchen staff the opportunity to work side by side with seasoned professionals. It had been his idea, his dream, to build something that would give back to the culinary community, but he had abandoned it. Until now, he picked up the proposal, his fingers tracing the words he had written so long ago. The words felt different now, like a promise he had yet to fulfill. Richard knew this was the first step. If he was going to make things right with Rachel, he had to start by fixing the system that had broken her in the first place. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the media contact he had worked with in the past. "David," Richard said when the call was answered, "I need your help. It's time we set the record straight." The next morning, the press release was ready. It wasn't just about Rachel. It was about giving credit where it was due, about recognizing the people who had helped build Dawson's Pizza from the very beginning. Richard made the call, and the press release went out announcing that Dawson's Pizza was not just a brand built on its success, but on the contributions of every person who had ever worked there. Rachel's name was at the forefront. The recognition she'd been denied for so long was finally hers. The garlic honey chicken pizza, the dish she had created that had become a staple of the menu, was now officially named Rachel's original garlic honey chicken pizza. Richard knew that this wasn't just a public relations move. This was an apology. This was the first real step in regaining the trust that he had lost. But he knew it wasn't enough. He still had to go to Rachel. He had to speak to her in person, to show her that he wasn't just trying to fix the company's image. He was trying to fix himself. Richard drove back to Rachel's apartment later that afternoon, his stomach a twisted knot of anticipation. He had hoped she would see the press release, that she would see the public recognition. But he knew it wasn't just about the words on paper. It was about his actions. He is willing to make things right, no matter how difficult it might be. He knocked on her door again, this time more confident, but still feeling the weight of the past pressing down on him. When Rachel opened the door, she didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, her eyes guarded, waiting to see if he was serious this time. "I did what I could," Richard said, his voice steady. "I made sure the world knows the truth. That garlic honey chicken pizza, that was your creation, Rachel. And I'm sorry. I should have given you the credit you deserved all along." Rachel's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't let go of her caution. "And what does that change?" she asked, her voice still tinged with bitterness. "You can't just fix everything with a press release and a fancy title. It's not that simple." Richard took a deep breath, his heart heavy. "I know it's not, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to give you the opportunity to do what you do best. I want you to come back to Dawson's Pizza, not as a helper or assistant, but as co-head chef. I want to restore your place in the company, to give you the respect you deserve." For the first time, Rachel hesitated. She looked away, her mind clearly racing. Richard could see the walls she had built around herself, and he knew they weren't going to come down easily. But he also knew that this was the first real chance he had to make things right. "I'm not doing this for you, Richard," Rachel said finally, her voice quiet. "I'm doing it for me, and for my kids. They deserve better." Richard nodded, understanding. "I know, and I won't let you down." Rachel stared at him for a long moment before finally letting out a slow sigh. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Richard smiled, relieved but knowing this was only the beginning. "Take your time. I'll be here." He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, Rachel called after him. "Richard, one last thing," she said. He turned back, his heart racing again. "Yes." Rachel's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no anger, no bitterness, just something softer, something that felt like the first crack in the walls she had built around herself. If you really want to fix things, start by proving it every day. Don't just talk about it. Do it. Richard nodded, his voice steady. I will. As he left her apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of the healing, the rebuilding, and the redemption he so desperately sought. And as the door clicked shut behind him, he knew that no matter how long it took, he would do whatever it took to make it right. The next few days were a blur of activity. Richard spent his time working behind the scenes, trying to implement the changes he knew Dawson's Pizza needed. But no matter how much he worked, no matter how much he tried to prove himself, there was an undeniable tension in the air. He could feel it the moment he walked into the kitchen of his flagship restaurant. The staff, once eager and energetic, now moved through the space with an air of reluctance. The hustle and bustle of a busy restaurant were still present, but the camaraderie was gone. The kitchen felt cold, sterile, nothing like the home he had worked so hard to create. Richard knew that part of the reason for the tension was Rachel's return. Some of the staff had been there when Rachel had worked at Dawson's Pizza, and they remembered how things had gone down when she left. There were whispers in the kitchen about her return. Some thought she had been given too much too soon. Others resented the attention she was getting, both from Richard and from the media. Richard knew this would happen. He had known from the moment he decided to bring Rachel back that the journey to rebuild would be a long one. However, the pressure trying to fix what was broken, coupled with the weight of the public's expectations, was beginning to take its toll. The media storm, too, had intensified. The press release had done its job in putting Rachel's name back in the spotlight, but it had also opened up old wounds. Stories of Rachel's departure from Dawson's Pizza resurfaced, and some media outlets were quick to criticize Richard for taking so long to acknowledge her contributions. Others questioned the authenticity of his apology, labeling it as a publicity stunt. One afternoon, Richard sat in his office, watching the news unfold on his laptop. A reporter on one of the major networks was discussing the changes at Dawson's Pizza, but the tone was far from flattering. Many are skeptical of Dawson's Pizza's decision to bring back former chef Rachel Morgan after long public silence and accusations of blacklisting her. Is this a genuine effort at redemption, or just another PR move to clean up a tarnished image? Richard closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. He knew he had opened himself up to this kind of scrutiny, but hearing it from the media, hearing it in the voices of people who didn't know the full story, made it sting all the more. He had asked for the chance to prove himself, to make things right, but he had never expected this level of resistance. He thought of Rachel, her words the other night, when she had told him she wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for herself and for her children. The door to his office opened, and his assistant, Sarah, walked in. "Richard," she said, her voice tight with concern. "We need to talk about the situation in the kitchen. Some of the staff are upset. They're not happy with the changes." Richard stood up, his posture stiff. "What do you mean upset?" "There's talk of leaving," Sarah said, her eyes avoiding his. "Some of the veteran chefs, the ones who've been with us from the beginning, they feel like Rachel's taking their place, like she's been given preferential treatment." Richard felt a surge of frustration. He had known there would be resistance, but hearing it directly from his own staff made it more real. He had worked so hard to build this business, to make it a place where everyone felt like family. And now, it seemed like that family was falling apart. "I understand their frustration," Richard said, his voice low. "But they have to understand, this isn't about replacing anyone. It's about fixing what went wrong. It's about doing what's right." Sarah hesitated before speaking again. "It's not just that, Richard. It's also the media attention. People are questioning whether Rachel's really earned a second chance, or if it's just a PR stunt to make the company look good." Richard clenched his fists. "I can't control what the media says," he replied, "but I can control what happens in my restaurants. And I'm not going to let this company be torn apart by rumors or old grudges." He looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. The journey ahead was going to be harder than he had anticipated. There were no easy fixes, no simple answers. He had to face the consequences of his actions, not just with Rachel, but with everyone who had worked for him. Later that day, Richard found himself back in the kitchen, standing in front of the staff. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was deafening as they all turned to face him. The veteran chef stood in a quiet, uneasy group, their arms crossed and eyes narrowed. Richard took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. He had to address the staff, face them head-on, and let them know he wasn't backing down. "Listen," Richard began, his voice steady but firm. "I know things have been hard lately, and I know some of you are frustrated with the changes. I want you to understand something. I didn't bring Rachel back to push anyone out. I brought her back because she deserves it. She was a part of this company from the beginning, and I've been blind to the things I've done wrong." He paused, his gaze shifting between the chefs in front of him. "But I'm not here to just make things right for Rachel. I'm here to make things right for all of us. For this kitchen, for this family. We've lost sight of what made this place special. The people, the passion, the love for food. And I'm going to make sure we get that back." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But then, one of the senior chefs stepped forward. It was Marcus, a longtime member of the team who had been with Dawson's Pizza for nearly a decade. "I get it, Richard," Marcus said, his voice low, "but we can't just forget what happened. We can't just pretend like everything's okay, because you said it is." Richard nodded, acknowledging the truth in Marcus's words. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to work with me, to rebuild what we've lost. And if you can't do that, if you can't find it in yourselves to trust me again, then I'll understand." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "But I'm not giving up. Not on Rachel, not on any of you. We're in this together, or we're not in it at all." There was a long pause, but slowly some of the chefs began to nod. The tension didn't lift entirely, but Richard saw a glimmer of something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But Richard knew one thing for sure. He had started something that couldn't be undone. The road to redemption was a long one, but it was the only one worth walking. As the weeks passed, Dawson's Pizza began to feel different. The tension that had once hung thick in the air started to ease. But it wasn't because of empty promises or grand gestures. It was because of real change, the kind of change that happens when people stop just talking about their mistakes and start taking action. Rachel, having reluctantly accepted the role of co-head chef, threw herself into her work with the same passion that had first inspired her years ago. The kitchen, once cold and divided, began to hum with energy again. But Rachel wasn't just focused on making delicious pizza. She was focused on rebuilding what had been lost, not just for herself, but for the community that had given her a second chance. Her first step was to start a program, a mentorship initiative aimed at giving back to the community that had always supported Dawson's Pizza. Even when things were at their worst, she began teaching cooking classes, but not just for any chefs. She focused on helping women who had been marginalized by the culinary world, those who had faced hardship and discrimination. The classes were small at first, but word soon spread. Women who had once given up on their dreams found new hope in Rachel's kitchen. They learned how to cook with the same passion and dedication that Rachel had used to build Dawson's Pizza from the ground up. It was more than just teaching how to make pizza. Rachel was teaching these women how to stand tall, how to find their voices in an industry that had once turned them away. She was showing them that their skills, their creativity, and their stories mattered. Richard watched this transformation from the sidelines, but he wasn't content to stay there for long. He knew that this was what Dawson's Pizza had always been about, giving people a chance, giving them the tools to succeed, and making sure they knew they were valued. He couldn't just sit back and let Rachel do it all alone. One morning, Richard walked into the kitchen to find Rachel working with a young woman who was carefully shaping dough for a new recipe. Her eyes were focused, and there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. He cleared his throat, and Rachel looked up, offering him a small, tired smile. "Morning, Richard. Everything okay?" Richard hesitated before speaking, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how I can help with this program. I want to make sure it has everything it needs. I want to give back, too. I've spent so much of my life focused on the wrong things. Now I want to focus on what really matters." Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She had learned not to take Richard's words lightly, but she had also learned that his actions spoke louder than his promises. "I was thinking about starting a scholarship fund," Richard continued, his voice steady but full of conviction. "A fund to help young chefs, especially women and minorities, who want to break into the culinary world but don't have the resources. It's called the Rachel Carter Culinary Grant. I want to make sure that the next generation of chefs has the same opportunities that I never gave you." Rachel's eyes softened at the mention of the scholarship. It wasn't just the money, she realized. It was the recognition. It was Richard's way of saying that her contributions mattered, that the work she had done to help build Dawson's Pizza was worth acknowledging, even if it had taken years for him to truly understand. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to Richard. "I'm not doing this for a scholarship, Richard," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm doing this because I love cooking, because I believe in this place. But I'll accept the scholarship if it helps others, especially the ones who've been overlooked." Richard nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew Rachel wasn't doing this for recognition, but in a way that made her contribution all the more valuable. She wasn't asking for anything in return. She was giving. Meanwhile, Tyler and Ben, Rachel's two sons, had been quietly observing all the changes that were happening around them. Tyler, now 16, had started helping Rachel in the kitchen on weekends, learning how to make the pizzas that had once been a symbol of their family struggle. Ben, the younger one, often sat at the counter, sketching out his own ideas for new pizza toppings, his mind always working. One afternoon, Tyler pulled Richard aside while they were both working in the kitchen. The tension that had once been between them was slowly easing, replaced by an understanding. And, if Richard was honest with himself, a sense of admiration for how Tyler had matured. "I've been thinking," Tyler said, his voice steady. "I know you've been trying to make things right with Mom, but I think you should know something. What you're doing is important. Not just for her, but for us, too, for our whole family." Richard looked at Tyler, surprised. "I'm glad you think so." Tyler nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yeah, well, Mom always told us that things take time. But it's more than that. You're doing the right thing now, and it means something." Richard's chest tightened as he met Tyler's gaze. "I wish I had realized that sooner." Tyler shrugged, his smile softening. Better late than never. It was in that moment that Richard realized how far he had come. He had started this journey to fix things with Rachel, but now he could see the ripple effect it was having on everyone around him. The family that had once been torn apart by his mistakes was slowly coming back together. Rachel had found a new sense of purpose. Tyler and Ben were finding their place in the world of food. And Richard, he was learning the true meaning of redemption. It wasn't about grand gestures or quick fixes. It was about the small, everyday actions that showed you were committed to change. It was about making sure the next generation had a better chance than the one before. As he watched Rachel work side by side with the women she had mentored, watched the spark of creativity and passion ignite in them, Richard knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The legacy of redemption wasn't just about repairing what had been broken. It was about building something that would last. The transformation at Dawson's Pizza wasn't just happening in the kitchen. It was happening everywhere. Slowly, but surely, Richard began to see the true meaning of redemption unfold before his eyes. not through the accolades or recognition, but through the way people work together, the way they care for one another. The staff had started to come together again, no longer just employees, but a true team. Rachel's mentorship program had become a staple of the restaurant's culture. The women she had trained were now passing their knowledge down to others, creating a cycle of giving back. The atmosphere was warmer, lighter, more collaborative than it had ever been before. But it wasn't just the staff that had changed. Richard had changed, too. He still walked the floor every day, but now it was with a sense of purpose. His every step was measured, his every word deliberate. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was part of the team. He was a leader who listened, a leader who understood that true power came from lifting others up, not just from holding on to control. One afternoon, as the restaurant buzzed with activity, Richard found himself standing by the kitchen door, watching Rachel as she effortlessly guided her team through the dinner rush. There was a quiet confidence in her now, a peace that had come from knowing her worth. She wasn't just a co-head chef. She was the heart of Dawson's Pizza, and everyone knew it. Tyler and Ben had been spending more time at the restaurant, learning the ropes from Rachel. Tyler, in particular, had become a strong presence in the kitchen. He had the same fire that Rachel had when she first started, the same creativity, the same passion. And it wasn't just in the kitchen. He had become a mentor to the younger chefs, teaching them not just how to cook, but how to think critically and how to care about what they were doing. It was clear that Tyler was growing into his own. Richard smiled as he watched Tyler roll dough with the precision of a seasoned chef. He had seen the boys struggle, seen him resist the changes at first. But now, there was no doubt in Richard's mind that Tyler was going to carry the torch for Dawson's Pizza into the next generation. As Richard stood there, watching his restaurant come to life in a way he had never imagined, he heard a soft voice beside him. "You've come a long way." He turned to find Rachel standing next to him, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were soft, but there was a strength in her gaze that spoke volumes. It wasn't just forgiveness she had given him. It was trust. With that trust came a deep bond that no amount of time or mistakes could undo. "I couldn't have done this without you," Richard said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Rachel shook her head, her smile gentle but firm. "We couldn't have done this without each other. You gave me a chance to come back, to prove myself again. But you also gave me the chance to give back to the community, to help others." Richard's heart swelled as he looked at her. He had given Rachel a second chance, but in reality, she had given him one, too. She had taught him that success wasn't just about numbers or prestige. It was about the people you helped along the way. It was about giving those who've been overlooked a place at the table, a chance to be seen, to be heard. Just then, Tyler approached, holding a fresh pizza in his hands. "Hey, Richard," he said, his voice calm and confident. "I made this for you. It's kind of a thank you for everything." Richard took the pizza from him, his eyes glinting with pride. "This looks incredible, Tyler." Tyler shrugged, his grin spreading. "It's just a pizza, but I think it's pretty good." Richard took a slice, savoring the taste. It wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. And in that moment, as he bit into the pizza that had become a symbol of their journey, he realized something. This was what redemption tasted like. Tyler watched him with anticipation, as if waiting for his approval. Richard smiled, his eyes meeting Tyler's. "This is amazing. You've got the same touch Rachel has. You're going to do great things here, I can tell." Tyler's face lit up with a shy smile, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed to melt away. They weren't just a business anymore. They were a family, and as long as they continued to work together, to learn from one another, there was no limit to what they could accomplish. A few weeks later, Richard stood at the entrance of Dawson's Pizza, looking up at the sign that had once meant so much to him. It was the same sign, but it felt different now. The company had grown, yes, but it had also changed in ways that mattered more. The walls of the restaurant now displayed photographs of the staff, the team that had helped build this place. The walls told a story of growth, redemption, and of a legacy that wasn't just about one person but about many. Richard looked around, his heart full. He saw the chefs working together, the servers smiling as they moved from table to table, and the customers laughing and enjoying their meals. He knew, at that moment, that Dawson's Pizza had become what he had always wanted it to be, a true family place, built for real people. Rachel stood by his side, watching the restaurant come to life. Tyler was in the kitchen, leading the charge. Ben was helping out at the counter, assisting customers with a smile. For the first time in years, Richard felt at peace. This was the success he had been looking for, not in the accolades, not in the reviews, but in the quiet moments, the moments that showed him he had finally done something right. "You did it," Rachel said, her voice low but filled with pride. "You turned it around." Richard nodded, his smile genuine. "No, we did it." As they stood together, watching the next generation take their place, Richard realized something else. Redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about the effort to change, to make things right, and to never stop trying. For the first time in a long while, Richard Dawson felt that what mattered most was no longer his name on the sign or the food on the table. What mattered most was the people who sat at that table, sharing stories, creating memories, and building a future together. As we've seen today, redemption isn't about perfection. It's about effort. Richard Dawson's journey was never about erasing his mistakes, but about owning them, learning from them, and making real changes. Sometimes, the hardest thing we can do is admit when we've hurt others, but that's where true growth begins. It's not the big gestures that define us, but the small, everyday actions, the moments when we choose to listen, to act with humility, and offer others a chance when they've been wronged. In the end, it's about restoring the trust we've lost and giving others the opportunity to rise, just as we've been given a chance to rise. If there's one thing we can take away from this, it's that true success is built not on titles or recognition, but on the strength of our relationships, the authenticity of our actions, and the legacy we leave for the generations to come. Remember, redemption is a journey, not a destination. And it starts with the willingness to change, no matter how difficult the road ahead may seem.